Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the greatest move you can make is not to be seen, it's to disappear, not in shame, not in fear, but in intentional silence, to reconstruct, to reset, and to resurrect the version of you that was buried under years of noise, disappointment, and mediocrity. See, most people think transformation starts in public, but real transformation begins in private. Disappearing is strategic, not shameful. When a culture worships non-stop visibility, stepping out of the feed can look like surrender, yet every serious builder understands the power of purposeful obscurity. The seed conquers darkness by spending its first season underground, shielded from trampling feet and hungry birds. Likewise, you withdraw to cultivate roots sturdy enough to support the harvest that is coming. Retreat in this sense is not the language of fear, it is the grammar of mastery, the calculated pause that precedes the next powerful sentence of your life. Silence grants what applause can never give, clarity. The roar of approval can drown out the still, small voice reminding you why you were born. When you disappear, you create a vacuum where distractions once lived, and in that emptiness, vision germinates. Isolation sharpens discernment. It reveals which relationships were covenant and which were convenience. It shows whether the work you called purpose was actually people, pleasing in disguise. You cannot edit a manuscript while the audience is shouting suggestions. You step away, review every line, and refine the message until the story is worthy of its future audience. Strategic disappearance is also an economic move. Markets reward scarcity. Diamonds skyrocket in price precisely because they are not scattered on every sidewalk. When you reduce access to your energy, your ideas, and your presence, you increase demand for them. Great brands understand limited drops. Great lives do too. By exiting the room, you allow anticipation to ferment in the minds of those who underestimated you. Meanwhile, you allocate time capital toward mastery, reading the books, refining the skills, building the systems, so the value of your next appearance multiplies. There is a spiritual dimension as well. Every transformative narrative features a wilderness season, Moses in Midian, David in caves, inventors in quiet garages. The pattern is clear, consecration precedes commission. Solitude becomes a forge where character is tempered and motives are purified of ego. Pride cannot survive extended conversations with one's unfiltered self. Neither can excuses. In the dark, you confront what daylight lets you ignore, and that confrontation produces authenticity strong enough to survive scrutiny. Some will mislabel your absence as defeat, but their misconception is none of your business. You are not building a reputation, you are building a reality. The butterfly owes no apology to the caterpillar critics who cannot imagine flight. Stay in the chrysalis until wings grow strong. Resist the temptation to live-stream your metamorphosis. Premature exposure tears fragile membranes. Call it a sabbatical, a fast, or a digital detox. Whatever you name it, treat it as non-negotiable. Give yourself permission to step back, power down, and go quiet. Exchange the addiction to being noticed for the discipline of becoming notable. When you reappear, you will not just regain the crowd. You will redefine the game on your own terms, armed with depth, direction, and dividends that only deliberate disappearance can deliver. Transformation begins in isolation. It doesn't begin on a stage in front of a crowd or in the glow of applause. It starts in quiet rooms behind closed doors where no one is watching and no one is clapping. It starts when you're left alone with your doubts, your truth, and your unrealized potential. This is the place where the noise stops and the real work begins. Most people want change, but they don't want the isolation that comes with it. They want evolution without separation, but it doesn't work that way. The cocoon is not optional for the caterpillar, it is essential. Isolation isn't punishment, it's preparation. You don't become something new while still clinging to the comfort of being constantly surrounded, constantly seen, and constantly validated. When you finally pull away from the distractions, the masks start falling off. You begin to see what you've been avoiding, who you've been pretending to be, and what's been holding you back. Isolation strips away the noise long enough for you to hear your own voice again. Not the voice shaped by social media, not the voice shaped by opinions, not the voice of comparison, but the one that's been buried underneath all the pressure to perform. That voice is where transformation begins. It's raw, it's unfiltered, and at first it might even be painful. But it's real, and real is the only material strong enough to build a new version of you. Isolation also reveals the habits that have governed your life. It reveals where you've been inconsistent, where you've compromised, and where you've coasted. In the presence of others, you can hide behind charm, routine, or even results. But when it's just you and the silence, your patterns speak loud and clear. And this is good, because you cannot change what you refuse to confront. In isolation, you start doing the work not for approval, but for alignment. You start holding yourself accountable, not to look good, but to actually become good. Good at managing your time, protecting your energy, and stewarding your gifts. There's something sacred about being hidden. There's a blessing in being overlooked for a season. In the silence, you develop the muscle of self-validation. You stop waiting on others to co-sign your destiny. You stop relying on external motivation and start cultivating internal discipline. That's where transformation takes root, when no one is clapping and yet you keep showing up, when no one is cheering and yet you stay consistent. That's the work that turns into confidence, and that confidence becomes momentum, and that momentum becomes transformation. Not surface change, not temporary hype, but deep, irreversible, undeniable transformation. In isolation, you learn how to fight your own battles. You learn how to heal without needing an audience. You learn how to win in private so that when the platform comes, you're not performing, you're overflowing. You become someone new not because the world asked you to, but because your purpose demanded it. And when you return not just changed. You return becoming a person who chose isolation not as an escape, but as the you must redefine your identity, not once, but again and again as you evolve. Too many people are trapped in who they used to be, who others told them they were, or worse, who they became just to survive. But survival mode is not your final destination. There comes a moment when you have to look in the mirror and ask yourself if the image staring back is a reflection of your true self, or a version you've been performing to maintain comfort, approval, or tradition. Redefining your identity is not about abandoning your past, it's about refusing to let it define your future. You were born with potential, but potential is not an identity, it's raw material. Identity is what you decide to do with it. The first identity you ever received came without your consent. You were handed a name, a background, a story, and maybe even a set of expectations before you ever had a chance to speak for yourself. Family, culture, religion, geography, they all shape the lens through which you saw yourself, and for many people, those identities become prisons, good enough to survive, but too limited to thrive. At some point, you've got to stop asking, who did they say I am? And start asking, who do I know I am? That shift changes everything. When you stop letting your past become your passport, you start authoring your own narrative, you start living by design, not by default. Redefining identity means you stop tying your worth to your titles, the job, the degree, the role. They may describe what you do, but they are not who you are. Identity is deeper. It's the truth you stand on when the stage is empty, the bank account is low, and the crowd is silent. It's the standard you hold when no one is watching, and it's the story you tell yourself when everything around you says you should quit. When you redefine your identity, you don't just update your goals, you upgrade your mindset. You stop playing roles and start living purpose. This process is uncomfortable because it forces you to grieve who you were, to let go of identities you've outgrown even if they earned you praise. You may have been the strong one, the fixer, the quiet one, the reliable one. But what if the next version of you requires softness, visibility, boldness, or risk? Are you willing to break the mold others depend on so you can become someone they've never met? Redefining your identity demands courage. It asks you to walk away from predictable approval in exchange for uncertain authenticity, but the reward is freedom, freedom to grow, to change, to evolve without apology. Identity is not static. It is a living agreement between who you've been and who you are becoming. And every time you level up, your identity must catch up. Redefining it is not an act of betrayal, it is a declaration of alignment. You are not bound to any version of yourself that no longer fits your vision. Give yourself permission to be new again and again. Your environment is not just the backdrop of your life. It is the architect quietly drafting the blueprint of your future, brick by invisible brick. Every sight, sound, aroma, and conversation is a seed landing in the soil of your imagination, determining what kind of forest will rise there years from now. Stay in stale air long enough and you begin to smell like stagnation. Inhale excellence daily and mediocrity becomes as uncomfortable as shoes 2 sizes too small. Look at any peak performer and you will find an ecosystem engineered for growth. Books positioned at eye level, mentors on speed dial, calendars guarded like bank vaults, and conversations charged with possibility instead of gossip. These are not random choices. They are environmental levers designed to yank greatness out of potential before complacency can anesthetize it. The athlete's muscles do not expand merely from lifting iron, but from soaking in a culture where sweat is a second language. Discipline is the dialect, and quitting is profanity. Many people pray for transformation while preserving the petri dish that cultivates their limitations. They attend breakthrough seminars, then return to break-even circles. They proclaim new standards, yet dine nightly with those allergic to ambition. You cannot outperform the expectations of a room you refuse to leave. Elevation requires relocation, and relocation is not always geographic. Sometimes it is relational. Sometimes it means deleting an app, muting a pessimistic voice, or replacing background TV noise with audiobooks that stretch your worldview. Even faith flourishes or withers according to environment. A single candle flickers fragile in the wind, but trap it inside a glass lantern, and that same flame becomes a lighthouse. Protect your flame. Guard your hope. Build boundaries that keep winds of doubt from blowing out what heaven ignited. Some will call it overprotective. Winners call it stewardship. The oak tree does not apologize for requiring good soil. Neither should you apologize for curating conditions that nurture your destiny. Environment also includes the internal atmosphere you cultivate, the soundtrack in your head, the attitude you rehearse before stepping into meetings, the standards you whisper to yourself in mirrors. If your inner conversation is cluttered, even the most lavish outer surroundings cannot compensate. Excellence outside must be matched by excellence inside, or the dissonance will sabotage progress. Choose words that water your calling. Speak futures, not fears. Take inventory. What in your space whispers small, replace it. What in your circle out puts doubt, reassign it. Your next level is already coded into your environment, waiting for you to flip the switch. When you upgrade the atmosphere, evolution accelerates by default, and progress that once felt uphill becomes as natural as breathing. Silence is a weapon, not the brittle hush of fear, but the deliberate quiet of someone sharpening purpose behind closed doors. When you withhold words, you conserve force, the way an archer pulls the string taut before letting the arrow sing. Noise expends energy. Quiet stores it like capital awaiting a strategic acquisition. In an era where everyone narrates every micro-victory in real time, the individual who keeps a developing vision unannounced holds an asymmetric advantage. Silence is reconnaissance. It lets you read rooms before the rooms read you. By listening longer than you speak, you harvest intelligence others spill in their rush to impress. Deals, motives, and insecurities surface unguarded around a person content to occupy the background. One well-timed sentence delivered after disciplined observation can redirect a negotiation more effectively than hours of chatter. Silence is insulation. Words bind you to positions. Withheld words keep you mobile. Announce a goal too early and you invite premature critique that punctures fragile momentum. Speak a promise before infrastructure exists and your reputation becomes collateral. Remaining quiet grants freedom to iterate, pivot, even abandon prototypes without suffering the public sting of inconsistency. The laboratory of greatness requires secrecy born of stewardship, not deception. Silence is amplification. Like a rest in music, it frames what comes next. A craftsman of influence understands every message needs negative space to breathe. When you finally decide to speak, your audience leans in because absence has increased appetite. Rarity multiplies impact. The diamond owes part of its value to centuries underground where pressure worked undisturbed. Silence is protection. Dreams germinate in vulnerability. Broadcast them to skeptics, and their unresolved failures, disguised as advice, can poison the soil. Guard your seedling ideas from foot traffic until roots grip the earth. Even relationships flourish when silence replaces reflexive defensiveness. A pause before responding can neutralize conflict better than brilliant rhetoric because restraint communicates security while verbosity often signals insecurity. Silence is calibration. Amid applause, it is easy to confuse popularity with progress. Retreat into quiet and metrics reveal themselves honestly. Bank statements, body composition, product feedback unfiltered by flattery. In stillness you detect micro adjustments that compound into mastery. Pilots call it trimming the plane, sailors adjusting the sails, builders the pivot. Silence is discipline. It trains the impulsive soul to wait for the optimal moment, much like seasoned traders sit on cash until the market misprices value. The gap between impulse and action is where discernment breathes and squandered opportunities resurrect as strategic strikes later. Silence is prophecy. It embodies faith in outcomes so certain they need no constant verbal reinforcement. Mountains never brag about height, they demonstrate it. When your work begins to tower, explanations become redundant. Let spreadsheets, product launches, healed families, and transformed communities articulate what your tongue reserved for creation. So choose restraint, weaponize quiet. While others squander advantage broadcasting half-baked moves, you will be loading the chamber of destiny in the holy hush of preparation, ready to speak only when the target is inevitable. Returning to the arena after a season of hidden construction is not a comeback, it is the premiere of a whole new edition of you. You step in with quiet authority, carrying a blueprint solitude revealed and muscles resistance built. Onlookers who watched you leave expect a modest upgrade, but your mandate is to rupture every forecast, to appear so expanded that former categories collapse beneath the weight of your new capacity. Tuition was extracted from each setback, compound interest harvested from thousands of unseen repetitions, and spiritual capital accrued from the prayers whispered when no one else heard. Upgrade is not decoration, it is reconstruction cell by cell, mindset by mindset, until average becomes an insult to the image you carry and mediocrity a betrayal of the mission entrusted to you. When you return, you speak less because outcomes now possess their own eloquence. You listen deeper because humility was wired into your reflexes through failure. Access to your energy comes by invitation, not default. Proximity has prerequisites. Scarcity turns into strategy. Limited exposure amplifies impact, like light concentrated through a lens. You invert the old formula. Instead of working to be seen, you allow excellence to make you impossible to ignore. Your calendar is guarded like equity. Minutes are invested only where vision appreciates. Legacy, you realize, is the compound effect of thousands of disciplined, undocumented choices underwriting a single visible breakthrough. The upgraded you walks differently, not from arrogance but alignment. Posture radiates conviction, cadence announces purpose, silence signals preparation. Critics may search for the former version, yet that iteration was buried during midnight engineering sessions no spectator witnessed. Questions about where you have been are answered by what you now carry, sharpened skills, clarified strategy, and metrics that convert doubt into undeniable data. You no longer petition for opportunity, you qualify for it by embodying solutions others deem impossible. Wealth gravitates toward precision, and you have calibrated your gifts to laser level accuracy, turning past wounds into intellectual property and former limitations into scalable systems. Return, then, not as a prodigal begging validation, but as a steward presenting multiplied returns on talents entrusted to you. Bring frameworks instead of feelings, protocols instead of promises, partnerships instead of dependencies. Let atmospheres adjust to you. Your presence becomes an instruction manual for possibility. Living demonstration that chrysalis seasons are investments, not interruptions. Your emergence redraws the map for anyone still wandering. proving that obscurity incubates greatness and that silence is simply the sound transformation makes before it roars. The reward for leveling up is the privilege of solving higher-order challenges while mentoring others through their metamorphosis. Arrive knowing destiny favors those willing to disappear, discipline themselves, and reappear as architects of realities once considered unreachable.